Hey everyone, welcome back to the District 3 podcast. I forgot what episode number we're in, but this is Edwin.
And this is Elena.
And I'm Migs.
And we're all here on the podcast, which is a good thing. And
boot.
Yeah, I'm just excited. I get happy when everybody's here because when someone's not here, I have to be like, oh, we're missing Elena, or we're missing Migs. But everybody's here in the flesh. I'm glad Elena made it out alive because she was actually in Florida.
I was during Hurricane Helene.
Right before, right?
I was on the other side of Florida. And no, it was, since I work in the news, I know how to keep up and read stuff. So I was like, okay, Jasper, if this is looking like this is bad, maybe we should stay in Orlando because we were staying in Melbourne Beach, which is like on the East Coast. And yeah, sure enough, DeSantis waived all the tolls, and I was like, oh, that means this is not good. If no one has to pay the tolls, that means we need to get out. So we went to Atlanta, but our time in Florida was perfect.
Hotlanta.
But before you went to Atlanta, you got to go to the Wizarding World.
Yes, I got to go. A lot of the places closed down right after we left, but we went to Universal. We got to go to see Harry Potter and try some butterbeer, and we had food there, which was really good.
Was there a lot of people there when you went?
So many people. Okay. When I rented a stroller, and the guy actually told me this is his busiest weekend. And the thing about Orlando is that there's people from all over the world. I mean, Disney and Universal are just worldwide attractions. You can hear it from different languages around you. You see a lot of white people that are not speaking English, and you're like, whoa, like
they're here like papi.
not even.
They traveled around the world just for that, just to come to Disney World and the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. I saw the weather when you were over there. It was pretty similar to whenever I went. It was like wet, and was there a time where it became kind of dry?
I've gone to Orlando a couple times, and Florida is very tropical, so it rains every day. Like where my family's from in Jalisco, it rains every day too. Oh. But then the sun comes out. So I've been kind of used to that with Orlando weather. While we were on the beach, while we were on the East Coast, it was sunny and hot and nice. It was actually really nice. And then I think it only rained one day when we were in Disney. It kind of was like a constant, but it wasn't like hard rain. It was just like a drizzle throughout the day, and it would stop and then it would drizzle again. So, which kind of sucked because I couldn't let Cece walk around because then she'd fall and get wet, and she still walked around, fell, and got wet. So, yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. To me, Orlando's crazy because I think that's like all the other Hispanics. Like I'm used to like Mexicans, Salvadorians, Hondurans, and then you go over there, you got the Cubans, the Venezuelans, the Puerto Ricanos, and you got like the whole
Sweet
other
food.
spectrum. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you made it out of there before things got bad, and I'm also glad that things didn't get as bad as they were. Like people, like the meteorologist said,
it's still pretty bad. I mean, we were on the East Coast, and all of that area got hit by tornadoes.
I saw that too. Yeah. Like the day before it was supposed to hit really, really hard. There was like tornadoes in the morning.
I'm not too sure. But it was just like for us, we were like honestly like. It was a blessing. We were there on vacation. So for us, while we were leaving and going to Atlanta, we got on I-75, which is what everybody else was taking from Tampa. And even at the hotel we were at in Atlanta, I mean, there was a little girl that came up to us and said, "Do you guys live in Florida?" And we were like, "No, we were just on vacation." And then she was like, "Oh, I had to leave my toys. And my house isn't there." And so to us, we were like, we're fine. This was just a couple days by the beach. We're fine.
To have that privilege, right? Because, I mean, like you said, just the suffering that people are going through there. But not only there, I mean, North Carolina was hit pretty hard, too, a few days before as well.
Yeah,
so
the week before,
we're definitely thinking of those people. But in happier news, Elena, you also have been doing a segment with Good Day NWA called Viral Vibes. Can you talk a little bit about that, and where can people find that?
Everything's about me today. I feel like I'm the person. I got an opportunity to kind of put some of my skills to work at work. Talking about what's trending on our website and kind of some ways that you can improve your SEO and blog post. So I kind of go through what our biggest stories are, and then I just talk about them and talk, we kind of touch base on like what was trending and some things that people may have missed. If you're familiar with Good Day NWA, they do a lot of segments throughout the community and even national news. So it's nice to just kind of take a moment to reflect and see what people are actually tuning into. So,
well, I think it's cool that you just did the second episode, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Second segment, yeah.
Yeah, second segment.
Is it like a weekly thing or what is it?
It's a bi-weekly thing, but I will be out of town the next time I can do it, so we'll have to do it the week after that or something.
And then I also saw Elena was a panelist on the Hispanic Women's Organization event. This is Elena Week, I think. How was that experience for you, Elena?
Well, I've been on a couple panels before. The Hispanic women one was very interesting because I looked into the crowd and I remembered sitting in the seats that those kids were sitting in, which was a really cool experience. And just getting, like, I find we were talking about democracy and voting. My panel was specifically about voting. And I had asked the room, how many people in your family vote? And a lot of the kids there, their family don't vote, either because they can't or because they don't want to, which is something that most of my friends don't vote. Half of my family, probably more than half of my family, doesn't vote, and they can vote. And it's like a topic that I feel like isn't talked about in the Latino community. And, it just kind of like trying to make sure that they know that they have a voice and that what that means is like voting is such a big responsibility. It was really fun. And I'm very passionate about voting. I don't care which side you're on. It's like if you don't go out there and put something down on that paper, well, it's not a paper anymore, but, then no one's going to know that that's what you want. And what your power is just a lot bigger than what people know,
And the people that want to vote can vote. I have a lot of friends that are undocumented. They're either undocumented fully or unDACA, and they know about the candidates. They know who to support and everything, and they just can't. So it's definitely a missed opportunity. But talking about opportunities, Mix, you got to direct the concert for Chappelle Roan at the Walmart Amp. Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah.
Did she play Hot to Go?
She did play Hot to Go. She played a lot of she played all the hits. I mean, she only has a certain amount of songs, but she took a little along on her audio on her audio check. But mainly because they were practicing for Austin City Limits. So there were now the song's out, so I can say they were practicing Barracuda because that was supposed to be like a big surprise. So it was cool just watching her, and I was on stage with her, man. She's like
she's tiny.
Yeah, she's small, man. Oh, wow. but yeah, because I was waiting for her to get off.
Well, you're also tall, Mix. So
yeah, but I mean, just watching her perform and just like her putting her hands over her ears and then like kind of like clicking, like telling her drummer to be like get on it,
Wow.
Yeah, so just knowing that she has that much control in musical, because I mean she was getting it. And then as far as the show goes, I mean that was amazing. That was like the highlight of my year. Like,
oh wow.
Yeah, I mean as far as concerts for this year goes, yeah.
I saw a lot of people dress up like very beautifully, and it's the first concert I've seen where it's standing room only.
Oh dang!
Yeah, it was Mermaid Night, so everybody dressed up. A lot of people dressed up as mermaids.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, but yeah, that was awesome. Then I got to go see Post Malone just as a patron.
The F1 tour, what is it called? F1 Trail, something like that.
Yeah, but that was also another experience within itself. I'm glad I got to go see it. Usually, when I don't do the video or we don't do the video. If I go to one of these concerts, I sit there and I'm kind of like, the cameras aren't, the cameras aren't matching. Like, that's nasty. Why would you take that out of focus shot? Like, what are they doing over here? But Post Malone, like, I was like in awe, man. They had
quality.
Yeah, and they had like 8 cameras. They had like a Steadies cam on stage. They had 2 hands on the side. They had like a robo, like one on the track in the middle. They had 3 in the back.
They're making a documentary.
Yeah, but it was just I mean, it was something that I needed to see. You know, for the first time, I wasn't like, they need to put me in here. For the first time,
tag me in, boss.
I was like, how do I get in here?
That's
so.
Cool.
Well, I'm glad you had that experience.
Yeah, so I feel like I need to go see bigger concerts so I can go expand my horizons.
Like to get inspiration or just
just to see like what the next steps are, because I feel like this is nailed, you know.
So when you saw that though, when you saw Post Malone, were you like, oh, that's next level, or were you kind of
just because I mean, and as the video director, like he was cutting 2 or 3 shows, man, because he had the IMAX, and that's what I usually do, and then we have a center screen, and usually the center screen brings in whatever the iMac has, and we'll just put some graphics over it, something simple. But no, this was 1 show for the side screens and 1 show for the middle screens.
Oh, nice.
And in that middle screen, they would put multiple boxes up, so there were random cameras coming up at the same time. Now, that is fucking difficult, man. Yeah, so that guy back there is either there was 2 of them or he is the fucking shit. You know,
he's the best.
Yeah. So that's what I need to get to.
Hey, well, there we go. Well, I'm excited about today's episode. We have the OG podcaster here of Northwest Arkansas, creator and host of the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast, Randy Wilburn. Thank you for joining us today, Randy.
Welcome, thank you. I appreciate that.
And for waiting patiently while we talk all these things.
all that extra banter and everything, and the prelude to the prelude.
So. We had a lot. We had a lot because we recorded like a co-host only episode about a month ago, and we should have waited because we had so much to talk about. Like this could have been a whole episode.
You sounded like you guys. I can leave the room if you guys have this conversation. So I think it's always good. It's the one thing I do miss with one particular show, which is I Am Northwest Arkansas, because it's always just me and one other person versus, kind of having like a group of people, like the Breakfast Club or something like that. I would love to do something like that. I think that would be a lot of fun if there was a format that made sense, and there were several people that really gelled and came in line with each other and were good foils for each other and would be able to kind of have that conversation. But no, you guys have a good chemistry, and I think that works. And people like that. I think it's at the end of the day, it does make a lot of sense.
Talking about that, I don't think we even I don't think we just joined each other because we had chemistry. We kind of just sat down.
I've never met Migs before.
No, that's good. I mean, what do they call those happy accidents, right? Yeah. I mean, it's like literally it just comes together, and you're like, oh my gosh, this was not planned. And sometimes I tell people some of the best stuff that you create are things that you were unintended consequences, things that just happened.
Yeah, and I know that you specifically with the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast. What are you? Are you almost at 300 already? Or are you getting close?
I've done 340 total. But the thing that I really I kind of hang my hat on is that I have a new episode every Monday, and I've been doing that since April of 2019. So every Monday there's a brand new episode of the podcast, and I've lost track after a while, but yeah, I mean, I am, I do keep count, and it's nice to remember that. But what's more important to me is just the consistency, because whenever I tell people, it's been out for 5 years, they're like, 5 years? That's a long time. It's like, so for me, it's like something that I kind of hang my hat on that, because people want consistency in their lives. And especially if you are reliable like that, it's like, oh, I know Randy's got a new episode coming out. I don't know what it is, but it's coming out. So,
and I think you've putting the sports podcast aside, because there's a lot of Razorback, Arkansas, but I think you've probably been the most consistent for the longest time, probably in our area, right?
Yeah, I'm not keeping track. I mean, I've been podcasting since 2009, so this is not my first rodeo, but it's the best rodeo that I've had, I think, in terms of what I've done. But after 1,900 episodes, they all become a blur. And
is that kind of where your count's at? With everything that you've done?
Yeah. That's so, a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of episodes. And the thing for me is it is me. This is just me doing it. When I do this podcast, I typically sit down. It's always been interview format. I've done monologues from time to time. Like when my brother-in-law passed away unexpectedly, I did a monologue about his life and just how precious life is in general, and how we need to don't count the days, make the days count. And so I've messed around and dilly-dallied with different formats, but the primary format is interview style. You know, me and one other person, me and two other people. I think the most I've done is I had a bunch of break dancers in here, and I think there were 6 of them.
Oh, wow.
And do
you remember what group it was?
I think you might have had this same group on, and their name is escaping me right now.
It's got Vaughn in it. Oh,
is it Latinos? Is Latino?
Yeah, and I think a couple of them are from Asia,
it is that one.
Yeah, and they team up with now they're with like Ambrosia.
Yes, exactly.
DJ
yeah,
Afrosia.
They used to, and the reason why I remembered them was because they used to do, whenever they used to do the block party on Block Avenue, they always had a location set up, because when we first moved here, my youngest son went out there, and he's not afraid of anybody, so he went out there and did some break dancing.
Breaking habits.
Yeah,
breaking habits. Yeah, exactly.
So you've been podcasting since 2009. What are some like changes? What are the 3 major changes you've noticed in podcasting today?
Okay, so I am, as I told you guys before we started recording, I'm an audio purist. So I prefer, like, this setup is totally fine. I prefer audio first. I'm audio first. I've always been audio first. I have gravitated towards more video, incorporating that into different podcasts that I do. With some podcasts that I do with some clients, I do video exclusively. So, but I prefer audio. So I'm an audio purist from that perspective. I think the technology has gotten much better I think of like some of the digital recorders that were out early on. They were great, and they're still great. I mean, I have a Zoom H6 that I've been using for years, and I mean, they use that in Hollywood, and it's not an expensive device, but you know, if you want to capture high fidelity, high quality sound, that's a really good device to use. But then, as you know, like with the Rodecaster and so many other devices that have come online in the last 7 or 8 years that have fundamentally given everybody that has a desire and a dream to want to do a podcast the best equipment to sound as best as they can. And I think that's the thing about it, right? So you don't need to be, I mean, we are in a radio studio technically, but you don't need this to put out a high level podcast. I have friends that do their podcast in a garage, and it sounds amazing. And so that's something that I've always, over the years, I've seen how fundamentally the technology has changed to give people the ability and the license to create some high quality content, but it not cost a lot. Like I always tell people nowadays, you can, across the street from this, where we're recording this, is the Fayetteville Public Library and the Center for Innovation, and they have amazing equipment. You can take a library card, go take that digital recorder out and record yourself. You can do so many different things that you just couldn't do a few years ago. And a lot of that is because of the proliferation of podcasting and why it's become like a native and accepted medium for exchanging ideas and information. Yeah. Right. And so, but if you go back, I mean, when people talk about podcasting, why it hasn't been around that long. 2004 is when it came out. They started sending out the messages through Apple, had part of the platform there. There were some others. In 2005, George Bush did the first Saturday presidential address, which every president does, but he was the first president to do it as a podcast in 2005, and so it kind of built on from there. But I also think that it's interesting that podcasting was made popular by somebody that was originally a DJ on MTV. So when you think about the origins of this industry and of this medium, you know, there's a long tail aspect to it. It's just taken a while for people to make it like their first choice, right? A lot of people will listen to the radio still. They might listen to Sirius, or you hear a lot of people that say, I don't listen to podcasts. And I'm like, that's heresy, right? You can't, don't ever say that. But people do. I mean, there's a lot of really smart people out there that just don't listen to podcasting. And it's fine. I tell people all the time, we are 20 years into it, and we're still in our early infancy. You know, you think about digital, like, you know, Kodak. 1 minute you had Kodak. They're making film. They're doing all this great stuff. Rochester's bustling. And then the minute that digital photography came out, what happened to Rochester? It just went down. And it kept going down. They didn't think digital photography was going to be a thing. And it was. And now we carry these wonderful devices in our pocket that can shoot in 4K, sometimes 8K, take amazing photos, and you can rival the best, multi-$1,000 DSLR camera that's out there. Yeah.
I used to record this podcast on my phone. Oh, it was just my phone.
Yeah, easily, totally. You could.
Was it the best quality? Most of the time, no.
No.
But I had to start somewhere, right? I didn't have the money to buy all this equipment or be able to invest in it like maybe we do now. But like back then, it was just the phone and then trying to use some sort of software to try to better the audio.
Right.
And it was a little difficult at that time because we were live on the radio when we were doing we were at the Civic Center in Springdale.
Yeah.
And I was trying to record live on the radio, but at the same time trying to use my phone to capture the audio. It was a mess.
It's crazy.
So I'm glad that we're here and now we have like the resources. We're very thankful for KUAF. We record in the same studio, you and I.
Absolutely.
So the fact that
it's huge.
We have that opportunity, I think, is great, right? But it's also like I feel we have an obligation to try to give people like some advice on how to start their own podcast if they want to do that, and just be there as maybe someone that's kind of gone through difficult times already and hope that they don't have to go through the difficult times that we went through.
Well, he said, I mean, everything has gotten like more artist and consumer friendly here. Because like that Rodecaster, I mean, what is that, like $700? Something like that?
It's not even that anymore because they have a new one. They have a Rodecaster 2 now that's out. But the original one, I think, came out at like $499. I think you can get it for like $299 now.
I can tell you the exact amount by looking at my bank account.
But like, needless to say that like that compared to like 3 years ago, like, that's cheap because you couldn't get anything good with it under $3,000. You know?
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, that and the supply chain issues that came about during the pandemic really made things very difficult to get, especially if you were doing live streaming or if you were doing podcasting. They, early on 2020, early 2021, it was very difficult to get high quality products. Everything was on back order.
And then the same thing with the cameras. Like now you got those Blackmagics for like $1,000, which I'm kind of against, but but yeah, you can get a film, or not, it's not film, but a digital video camera for like $1,500, and it's like great quality with the things they even use on Netflix,
Yeah, and that's not even
which before. I mean, if they're a camera, you're looking at about $35,000 minimum.
Yeah, it's expensive. Yeah, I mean, listen, and I tell people all the time, start off used, and eBay works really well. Yeah. You can get good stuff, and
then to me, I'm always like, follow the process, man. If you don't know what you're getting, get something you can afford, and then you'll know what you're missing. Mm-hmm. You know what you want up next. Yeah. If you don't know about it, then you don't need it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they can come to these podcaster meetups that happen every last Thursday of the month at the Fayetteville Public Library, where there's people that have experience, or people that are just coming in wanting to become content creators, like capitalize on those opportunities. There's always at least one or two people that are really experienced in podcasting at those meetups, and those happen every last Thursday of the month. I think this month,
both here in Northwest Arkansas and in Little Rock.
In Little Rock as well.
So,
what are some podcasts, like national podcasts, that you listen to that you enjoy, Randy?
Mm-hmm. So I listen to My First Million with Shampuri and Sam Parr. I listen to The Daily every day, like literally every day. I listen to Up First from NPR. I listen to what else do I listen to fairly regularly? Marketing Against the Grain. I listen to a lot of marketing podcasts. Just because I know it's kind of crazy, but I'm always listening. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts about podcasting. Mm-hmm. That would be too meta. But I listen to a lot of podcasts about marketing and about business and business development. And I just think, nowadays when you think about, so like in a former life, I used to work at ABC News, the network, and working in a media environment, it's a lot different than working at a lot of other companies. And so, you're doing some stuff with KNWA, and it's just a different dynamic. And so I cut my teeth in traditional media. But nowadays, as we just shared, the technology is such that any individual now can be their own media company. and can put out high quality content that, I'm watching, I do it because I go on YouTube, and some of you probably go on YouTube and watch people that you follow or you subscribe to their channels, and they're doing stuff in their house at a high quality where you look at it on your 4K TV and you're like, wow, this looks absolutely really good. That was not possible back in the day. Like when I worked at ABC back in the 90s, and I know I don't look that old, but when I worked at ABC, it was, we had all this big equipment we used to carry around, and it was, outside of doing stuff in the studio, when you would go out on a shoot, you were carrying you were carrying a lot of heavy bags, a lot of stuff with you, and it's just different now. And the technology has made it such that it has democratized your ability to create content that people will consume. And we see that because that's why the Mr. Beasts of the world and so many others are able to do stuff. Now, of course, his budgets are off the chart now, but because he'll spend $3 million on one video. But streamers, when he started, that was it. All of those and most of the young kids, the cool kids, that's all they look at now. Like
streamers like Kai Cenat or like Actual Speed, they literally just have a nice camera that follows them either around a different place or in their bedroom, and they get like hundreds of thousands of people watching them live, right? I guess it's really about how you use the tool, not really the tool nowadays. What would you say are maybe some misconceptions that people think about when they think about podcasting?
Well, one of the misconceptions actually plays into this whole idea that anybody, I think anybody could create a podcast, but I do think you need to take some time to think about the podcast, what you want to create, the message that you want to get out there. Because while it is important to, have a high quality podcast, meaning the sound, the fidelity is excellent, if your content isn't good, nobody's going to listen.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. The audience is going to tell you as much, right? And discoverability is probably still the biggest challenge that podcasters have. It's like, how do I make you aware that my podcast exists? I'm sure you deal with it. You have friends that know you, and they're like, and you mentioned the District 3 podcast, it goes in one ear and out the other.
We talked about that on an episode.
But that's just how it is. People close to me don't listen to my podcast. And I'm like, I talk about this all the time. And it's like, how do you not listen to the podcast? And then some people are just like, I just don't listen to them. It's not like me personal, but it's like, I just don't listen to podcasts in general. So that's why I'm saying we're still in the early phases. And when you do a podcast similar to ours, so the District 3 podcast is more of a location or localized based podcast, right? Because you're not getting people from New York that are listening to this unless they're thinking about coming to Northwest Arkansas. My podcast intentionally was a hyper-local podcast, which is kind of a niche within a niche, because my goal was to tell the story of Northwest Arkansas, why I came here, and not so much why I came here, but what people can expect when they do come here. But at the same time, I wanted to be able to educate people that were already here about what makes this place great, right? Because sometimes we're so close to something, we can't see it. So we have to kind of step back. And so my podcast is a way for people to step back that live here and really take in why Northwest Arkansas is so special. And I know I sound like a homer at times, but it really is the case. It's what I've seen over 10 years being here in Northwest Arkansas, that this is a special place. And it's not perfect. No place is. But if I had to pick and choose, and I've lived all over the world, I've said that before on the podcast. I lived in the Bay Area. I went to school in Washington, D.C. I lived in Atlanta. I was up in New England for 17 years in the cold weather. And I got to say, this is one of the most outgoing and open places that I've lived in. And here we are in the South and quote unquote the heartland. And again, we have issues, right? Arkansas has issues, but I think that the upside is tremendous. And so I'm playing the long game, not the short game.
Yeah.
Something about your podcast that I really like is over the years, while I was at the School of Journalism, if I had someone that I was going to interview, I'd look them up and your podcast would always come up. Yeah. And I would learn a lot of things, of background information on these people. I think maybe, I'm not sure if Steve Clark was on once, Fayetteville
I haven't had him on.
Okay.
I haven't had him on.
That was one that I was iffy on, but I mean, like, even with just Colbert, I listened to that podcast before
Dr. Colbert. Yeah.
I also listened to that one to prepare for ours.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it helped me. Because I wanted to know, like, okay, the kind of like more about their life so that I could kind of ask questions that weren't similar, but that can be informed and educated based on what you had put out. So it seems like it helps a lot.
And totally. And I've done that too. And now I've even now with artificial intelligence being in there, and we haven't really talked about that, I'm now using artificial intelligence to inform me about things. So I use a thing called Notebook LM, which is part of Google's platform. You can sign up for it. And so I'll create a notebook of up and coming guests. And I did it the other day, actually. I took some information. I had Elizabeth Pringer on. And Elizabeth Pringer is a local entrepreneur, female entrepreneur. I always want to stress that because she has this thing called Fem Health that she did with April Roy, who started, so they're kind of working on femtech ventures. And it is an area, it's a niche because a lot of women that are in the femtech space are not finding the sponsorship. They're not finding the funding like a lot of men are finding that are doing something similar. And so she's working in that area. But anyway, I already know Elizabeth. I know what she's doing. I know what it's all about. But I took a lot of, because I'm real big on research, I took a lot of the information that I had researched about her and fed it into a notebook on Notebook LM. And then now it has a new feature where it will spin up a podcast episode. And I listened to that. It was 9 minutes and 24 seconds long. And I listened to it. And it really helped me to kind of crystallize my thinking about how I was going to approach the interview.
Oh, wow.
And I had done that before, but not where I used AI to do it. I would listen, like you said, listen to a previous episode where somebody's been featured, because now what you find is that a lot of times we recycle guests between different podcasts, right? And there's nothing wrong with that because sometimes it's good. Somebody may share a different story on your podcast than they share on mine, and so that's that. Or they might even speak a different language. And that's, so you have all kinds of options. And I think, that's why I love being a guest on other podcasts. I just don't get to do it as much as I'd like to because I have my own podcast to do. And so that creates a challenge. But I would say that kind of doing that, getting back to what I was saying with the Notebook LM.
Is that free, by the way?
Yes, it's totally free. And you can sign up for it. And
What's it called again, you said?
Notebook LM. It's part of Google. Yeah. It's just Notebook LM. You can Google it, no pun intended, and Google will show you how to do it. And if it tells you that you have to sign up on a wait list, it's just because the wait lists fill up, and then they'll release it, and then it fills up again, and then they'll release it.
So it's audio then?
No, Notebook LM is basically, think of a notebook on Google. On your Google platform, it would be one of the things that you would choose, like Google Sheets or Google Docs or Google Drive. You'll also have a Notebook LM thing that you can log into, and then it will be tied to your account. And it will allow you to upload. Just imagine putting, like, I could take this magazine right here and take all the contents, if this was PDF, and upload it to Notebook LM. Then I could take something else that you gave me on a potential person that you want to have. I could upload that to Notebook LM. And then that becomes the foundation or basis for your research. And then you would utilize, Notebook LM utilizes the artificial intelligence that Google has created called Gemini to then parse that information and then create any type of feedback that you want on it. I could say, give me an outline of all this information on whatever I've just uploaded. In this case, it was on Elizabeth. So it gave me an outline, and then I said, based on the information I share with you, share with me a list of questions that you think would be germane to the type of questions that I typically ask on the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast.
Oh, wow.
And it did that. Then I said at the final stages, because this is a brand new feature, I said at the end, create an audio of this content. And what Notebook LM does is that it has these two avatars that then have a conversation back and forth with each other over the content that I uploaded to it.
Yeah, I've seen that college students are using it. They're putting up PDF forms of like biology, boring nonsense, it creates a podcast.
And it's huge.
It doesn't do it in your voice yet, right?
No, it's two avatars.
Like it's just two avatars. Yeah. So it's just two voices. Yeah. And I was listening to a podcast about behind the people that created it, and they purposely chose the people that they chose. The AI voices that they chose for it, it's a woman and a man, and they use it. But their banter, it's great. If you listen to it, it'll blow you away, and it's like, oh my gosh,
it's not like just boring information.
No,
like
they not.
Sound like two people conversating,
and it's only going to conversate about the information you feed it. And then it will have a conversation. So yes, it will extrapolate out ideas and kind of talk about that. But the banter, it's funny. And it's like, wow, it is kind of funny. Yeah. And when I listened to it, because I knew enough about Elizabeth, I was like, man, this is spot on. Yeah. It's spot on. That's where things are headed.
Is there any other things that you use AI on at the moment?
Well, I mean, I live in ChatGPT for a lot of work that I'm doing from a marketing perspective and just getting ideas. And now with the, I pay for my ChatGPT, but I also use Perplexity and I also use Claude.
I only use the ChatGPT for like podcasting for the description, for the podcast description.
And I have a service that I use called Decipher, which does that.
I'm being honest.
I mean, well, again, it's a time thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes
I just don't have the time to do all that. And then when I look at what it creates, sometimes I'll make tweaks and changes to it. But a lot of times I'm like, that's actually really good. But what I did is I fed it a lot of the titles that I had previously created myself, so it understands my writing style. Yeah. So now it spits out things that would be like, I would write that.
Is that why it's worth like paying for it? Because
absolutely,
it kind of becomes personal?
Yes, because you have more control over it.
That's why they post the social media posts, because I'm like, what am I gonna write?
That's why I'm like, why is
I use ChatGPT too, and I think like a very important thing is like people don't understand how to use it sometimes.
No,
like you have to be descriptive. If you're not adding those things, it kind of goes back to like, do people know how to research sometimes?
Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah. So
you still have to train it, right? But when and every time I play with it, I'm always in the back of my head thinking like, am I talking to Jarvis, right? Am I Tony Stark? And do I have this artificial intelligence that understands everything that I want to do?
Yeah.
But I mean, even with ChatGPT, you have the ability of uploading information about who you are, your persona, what matters to you, the way that you write, the things that you never like to write, and then you just share that with it, and then it will inform how it responds to any prompt that you make it.
I haven't used it yet for like to create my own bio.
Most people have it. Yeah, I definitely would.
Do you use it for that?
Yeah, I've
Have
used
you
it
used
for
it?
everything.
Like, can you give me your bio?
If you go see my bio now, and then the thing about it is with OpenAI, when you do that and you've already had a bio and you say, listen, I want to create a bio to put on my bio page that will be consumed by PR professionals, news reporters, the whole 9 yards. It will then take your bio and make it make sense to that those end people. User and those people. That to me is the beauty of it, because otherwise you're calling somebody to ask them, how should my bio be structured? Yeah. This is kind of doing it for you. And trust me, it knows and understands. And if you're using the latest version that actually has infused reason into it, it's going to really think and do things. It's insane how fast it's come since 2022.
Also, like recently I had screenshotted my Instagram and then fed it to ChatGPT and said like, describe me or roast me. I think it was like a little trend going on.
Yeah.
But it helped me because I was like, okay, because, when it comes to marketing yourself and the product that you're putting out, podcast or media, you want to make sure that you're hitting the right audience.
Absolutely.
So then you could say like, it told me, it's like, oh, are you a mom or are you a podcaster? Are you doing a podcast about motherhood?
Yeah.
So then I was like, okay, then I got to reevaluate the type of information and then like say like, okay, if I want to reach this target audience or grow my podcast, what type of post should I make? And then it gives you specific
that's a good
like
point.
that,
And I mean, because again, we become an echo chamber, right? And it's like all you do is you think, oh, I'm creating this and it's amazing, and then but you need that other perspective. You need somebody to come in. That's why it's important. I mean, I think just having the three of you guys, again, each of you brings something different to the table, and it's helpful to have that, because what you do is you end up balancing out each other. And so, Irvin, you're not an echo chamber of one. Mm-hmm. You have multiple people that you can get feedback from. You know, and that's one of the challenges that I have as a sole practitioner, as a podcaster. Yes, I do have somebody else, but anybody that I'm interviewing is not going to be like, oh, well, you should have done it this way. They're like, well, I don't know how to do this. Yeah. You're the person. And I've done enough that I know what I'm doing, but still, it's always good. And so I'm always looking for constructive criticism or feedback or just something. And I make little tweaks here and there because I think it's important. And I have enough friends that are in the business or are doing podcasting at a high level that can give me that kind of feedback where I'm not like offended, like, oh my God, what, it's like, no, it's cool. And that's why, to your point, back to when you talk about our cast and why it's important to have a program like that here in the state of Arkansas, or in any state for that matter, is because there is a lot of people out there that are doing this, and no one is alone when getting a podcast started. There's a lot of folks out there that are willing to help you. Mm-hmm. That was something that I learned early on, even before I got involved with podcast movement. I used to go to a program called Blog World. It used to be called Blog World, and then it became New Media Expo. So like in 2009, 2010, it started out as Blog World. It morphed into New Media Expo, and then the people that worked the podcast track for New Media Expo ultimately started Podcast Movement, which has been around for like 10 years.
But like I was going to say, before we move on from the subject of AI, which we just got some information now, what is it? Adobe Podcast. Have you guys heard of that?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like we got some audio file that was horrendous a little bit ago. and that thing, man.
Cleaned it up.
Well, I mean, it wasn't perfect, but Lord, like, I mean, it
was serviceable.
It was damn near.
Yeah. Well, and so I use Descript, and Descript has a thing where it will tune Sound Studio, and it will just go in and tune the whole thing. And you could do it 100%. You could do it 95, 90. I usually go down to 80. Because here's the thing, and this is what I tell people is I say, first of all, everybody that talks on a podcast has some type of verbal miscue, a verbal tick. Yeah. Some are more pronounced than others. Like there are people that say like after everything, like literally everything, or like and you realize that. So over time, I have worked hard, but I still have them.
What are your things, Randy? What are your things?
Well, every now and then is I don't say like a lot because I remember my grandfather saying and then I don't say that. But my grandfather, I used to remember him say he would say no, I don't know. I don't know. He would say I don't know, so stop saying So I kind of broke my habit of that, and but yeah, I try to catch myself. But Descript will catch every verbal tick, and I never remove 100% of them because like before, my editor would remove them, and I would say keep it natural, but don't make the person sound stupid, right? Yeah. And now it's like you can literally. It's a sliding scale. You can be like, 100%, just get rid of it all. Or you can, I want to do like 70%. So leave a few of those in there just so that you don't lose the cadence of how somebody sounds. Because I don't want somebody to listen to it and be like, I don't recognize myself, right? I'm like, I sound perfect. You made me sound perfect. And I'm like, because that's not how you sound in the first place. So
because there's some websites.
There is a fine line that you want to follow as far as that's concerned.
There's some websites like, for example, I think it's Podcastle, I think is what it's called, where when you press the button so that it cleans stuff, when you listen to it, it doesn't sound good. It sounds like there's pauses that shouldn't be there. And I've struggled to find the right one. I signed up for Riverside. Yeah,
and Descript and Riverside are comparable. I mean, both of them have what they call they don't destroy the original underlying quality of the recording. But they will give you a different version of it that you can listen to and say, oh, I like that, or tweak it. That's why the whole idea of the sliding scale of going up to 100% and going down to like 80 or 70 or whatever, you never ruin the original recording. It's always going to be in its original state in form. But then what happens, what the software does is it goes over top of that and gives you a version of that where they do all the cleanups and edits and everything. But if you say, "Oh, I don't want to ruin the original recording," then you don't ruin it that way. So it kind of gives you that. But software, that's what software does now. Like, because even before the script, I was using a thing called Auphonic, which is which is a German company, and Auphonic does a really good job of filtering out unwanted sounds and noises, leveling the audio and the volume, which is the biggest thing, right? Because you don't want to play a podcast in your car and then it's all like, really, it just comes on like Mike Tyson. You don't want that. Nobody wants that. So you want to be able to control that. And because, again, you have to consider how people are listening. They might have earpods on. They might be in their car. They might be on a treadmill at the gym. You want to have that even keel. And you can tell the differences with episodes or shows that you listen to where the sound is all over the place and it's a hot mess. Yeah. So, yeah.
Definitely.
I was going to say, before we move on to, I guess, the Arcast stuff, I wanted to say, so you said you work for ABC Network.
Yes.
Can you give us like a little bit of history on what you did and what brought you kind of to this point?
Yeah, that was back in. So I was there during the Clinton administration.
Okay.
The whole Monica Lewinsky scandal.
Good old Slick Willie.
Yeah, Slick Willie. It was Arkansas's best and brightest, and I got to work both with Peter Jennings on World News Tonight, and I worked with Ted Koppel on Nightline. I was there. Like, the biggest events that happened was the death of Princess Diana.
Oh, yeah.
I got to cover that. I spent a lot of time at the news desk when that happened. I also covered Heaven's Gate cult, which was a cult of people that followed this guy named Doe, and he got them all to commit suicide in San Diego. Yeah. That was a big deal. I was working on Nightline. We were able to actually break some of that news. That was before like pre-social media and all that. Yeah. So when you were breaking news, you were like still calling people and doing all this stuff, and now it's much different. But it was it was a really interesting time. I got to work with News One, which basically the way the network works is that ABC supplies news to all of the ABC affiliates, but it also supplies specific branded news stories to its O&Os, which are owned and operated by ABC, of which like KABC in LA is one, WJLA in Dallas is another. Those are owned and operated by ABC, by the network. And so I would work with different reporters like Bob Woodruff, the guy that suffered the brain injury over in Iraq, and now he does a lot of really interesting things. He's back and healthy now, but I worked with him at News One. I worked with Juju Chang, who is one of the lead people that work on Nightline. And so I had a chance to really cut my teeth with some really interesting people. And it's kind of cool when I turn on ABC and still see Martha Raddatz covering international affairs for ABC, because I worked with her when she was there, and I'm like, man, I always tell her, she's like,
and you were like their producer? Is that what you were?
So doing? I was like a production assistant. So I worked directly with Ted Koppel on news reports, and would get him information that he needed before he would come on that night, you know. And so it was an interesting season, and I got to really kind of cut my teeth in news. And I just decided, because I had an opportunity to go work in New York for World News Tonight, and I turned it down because it was just an all-consuming fire, and I just didn't have much of a life for the period of time that I was there. And so I decided that maybe broadcast journalism wasn't the route to go. Yeah. And it's much different now, but it's still an all-consuming fire.
Yeah, no, like, World News Tonight would have been one of my dreams like a decade ago.
Yeah.
One of my biggest dreams was to go on Good Morning America.
Okay.
I wanted to be a cameraman on the rooftop getting Beyonce in the morning. You know?
Yeah. And all those shows, like, so GMA is run out of New York. World News Tonight technically is run out of New York, but it's also run out of Washington, D.C. Nightline is out of Washington, D.C. Okay. So that was the one that, and This Week it used to be called This Week with David Brinkley. It's now just called This Week. But all those shows, there were several shows that ran out of Washington, D.C., and that's where I was based on DeSales Street, right downtown, about 3 blocks from the White House.
Did you work on 9/11?
No. I was out of the industry by then. So, but I had an appreciation, and I talked to a lot of friends that were covering that, and that was definitely. It was definitely a challenging time, and I can only imagine what the news desk was like when that happened. I mean, you people that were probably there for 4 or 5 days on end and probably never went home, covering that event because it was such a big deal. Mm-hmm. So, but I actually lost a friend in 9/11. He was in the South Tower.
Oh man.
He was a guy that I swam with in high school, and his name was Andy O'Grady. And every year at 9/11, I always throw up my little memorial shot of. I go to the reflecting pool that's there where the towers used to be, and I just happened to be there the first time I was there after they built that, and I looked down and I'm like, oh my God, James Andrew O'Grady. I'm like, that's my buddy Andy, and I was like, so I took a picture of that. So I always post that on 9/11, and I always give a shout out to him because he died too soon. He went and swam at the University of UCLA and was an amazing swimmer, and that's where we knew each other because we swam together in high school, and it's just really sad when you realize that. And I didn't know he had died in 9/11 until after the fact. It I found out later because we had kind of lost touch with each other. But then one of my other friends was like, Andy was in the South Tower, and it was like. And the crazy thing was, I was in New York, and this is just a 9/11 story since you bring it up. I was in New York the Friday before 9/11, visiting with a client on the 17th floor of the North Tower. The 17th floor of the South Tower. Wow. Because at the time I was working in the design industry, and I worked with a client that had an office in the World Trade Center. And I was there on the 17th floor. Oh, everybody that was in that office survived, thankfully. But it just to know so many people that died. And growing up as a kid, I grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey, which is a bedroom community of New York City. I used to go to the World Trade Center every year. That was like a field trip. So like kids in Northwest Arkansas, they go to Crystal Bridges or the Amazing whatever for a field trip. My field trip was 3 places. We went to the Bronx Zoo. We went to the Empire State Building, and we went to the World Trade Center. So I had been in the World Trade Center a gajillion times. Oh, wow. And I'd been up on Windows of the World, the restaurant that's all the way up at the top, because they used to take us up there as students. And it's just, for me, driving home from Howard University, where I went to college, the North Star for me was when I could see the World Trade Center on 95 in the distance, I knew I was close to home, and not having that anymore. The Millennium Tower is great, but it's just not the same.
It's not the same, man.
Not having that, there, it's amazing. And I was just in New York a couple of months ago to do a presentation for the Port Authority, and when I landed at LaGuardia, just looking, because as you come into the city, you either come in from the south or the north. So you come up above like Washington Heights and you come over into Queens, or you come under like the Verrazano Bridge and come up by the lower tip of Manhattan. But just not seeing the towers there any longer. It's just, it's amazing. So.
I bet, man. I have that. I don't know what they call it, but I have this weird like nostalgia thing where I think about the Twin Towers a lot because when I was a kid, I used to be obsessed with them. Like before September 11 happened, like I would look at the encyclopedias in school and just go to New York to hope that I could see the World Trade Center. So when I got to go to New York earlier this year for the first time, like I loved seeing the one World Trade Center, but I was
it's
like,
not
man,
the same. Like
I wish I could have seen the Twin Towers. I'm kind of jealous that you were able to see it multiple times.
Oh yeah, listen, I spent a lot of time in there, and it was always a fun place to be and hang out, and like I said, I literally remember, and I'll never forget this. I was talking to my wife on a cell phone, and I was coming right there at the base of where the towers were. Was where you got on the tunnel to go over to New Jersey, because I was flying out of Newark Airport, and I was like, guess what I'm looking at? And I was like, I'm looking at the Twin Towers. I'm on my way to the airport to catch my flight. It's a Friday night, whatever day that is. It's 11th, 10th, 9th, 8th, 7th of September 2001. And I was like, never in a million years would I have thought that would be the last time that I would see those towers, which was crazy. Yeah. And when I thought about it, I was just like, oh my gosh, and then to learn people that I knew that had died in there, and it just it was something.
Yeah,
so.
in the news industry, I've been told that 9/11 was a lot of kind of some people's tipping point.
Yeah,
and so a lot of people kind of left the industry.
Yeah, it was a watershed moment for sure. Because I had friends that were in the industry that got out after that.
Yeah.
And then there are different periods of time where people got out of the industry. Unfortunately, a lot of people got out of the industry after 2016 for a lot of other reasons. So but let's just say that because I mean you don't want to. After a while, it gets old when somebody's telling you that you're a liar and that you're not giving out the real facts, and it's like but. That's a conversation for another day.
I have a lot more friends that dropped out then.
Yeah.
So then what brings you from there to good old beautiful natural state of Arkansas?
Yeah. So in 2014, I a very dear friend of mine who I've been friends with since '97, when he hired me after I left ABC, I got into consulting, and I started working with engineers and architects, and I absolutely loved it. And it wasn't until later that I got to marry the things that I had learned in the broadcast news space with the architectural industry, but I was able to in 2016. And so about 2 years before that, I had relocated here to come back and work with this company. And the company's called Zweig Group, and they used to be called Zweig White and Associates. And Mark Zweig, who is a teacher at the Sam Walton College of Business, is my good friend. He's the reason why I moved to Northwest Arkansas.
Oh, okay.
And so in 2014, when I came here, there were no podcasts about Northwest Arkansas. There was nothing about Northwest Arkansas, except for the Northwest Arkansas Democrat Gazette and just whatever I could find on Google. And so when I created the podcast, it was essentially the podcast I would have wanted when I moved here in 2014, but it didn't exist. And then in 2019, I created my podcast, and then the rest, as they say, is history. But my podcast, I feel like, has had the intended effect that I would have wanted back in the day, which was it convinced some people to move here. They were like, "Oh, I listened to it." Like I have a very dear couple that are great friends of mine. They've been on the podcast, but they told me, your podcast is the reason why we moved here. And they had listened to an episode I did with David Johnson from the Fayetteville Public Library, talking about the new expansion, because I had already had the library on once, and so yeah, I mean, they were like, "Yeah, your podcast was basically the foundation for us deciding to move here." And I've met other couples that have said the same thing to me. So that more than anything else has made it worth the price of admission in terms of putting in the time and effort to put this out there.
And things are on a greater scale now in regards to podcasting, because now there's kind of like a podcast movement happening in Arkansas in general. So it must make you happy to see that.
Yeah.
To see that you're one of the first that was, talking about community, if not the first, and just seeing multiple people now do something similar or just do their own thing, with Arcast coming up. For those that don't know, it's the Arkansas Podcast Festival that happens every year now.
Right. This
will be the third year. I believe have you been to both of them?
I have not. I've only been to one briefly, and I did. So this will be the first time that I'll be able to really participate in the event, because I think I was out of town for the first one. So what did you see on that? Because you went to the one in Rogers, I believe. That's where I saw you. Yeah, Miggs was there too. What was your experience like there? For the people that don't know what it looks like, it was it was, I think, what I always tell people, don't despise small beginnings. You have to start somewhere, right? And the idea that you're going to come out of the gate and fill up a stadium, that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
I think you just have to start off small. And I think that, so when I did participate in that event up in Bentonville, it was a lot of fun, because it was me just talking about things that I like to talk about, which is podcasting, and why I started my podcast. Because the one talk that I've done at Podcast Movement over the years has been finding your voice and just pressing record, right? And it's the idea that, like, you are the prototypical person that I'm talking to. You being you, Irvin, is the prototypical person that I'm talking to, is because you have a message, you have a story to share, and people need to hear it. But then there's other people that are out there that have a different story to share, and they need to hear that. So you have to own your truth and walk in that place of power that you have, that only you have. And I can't, you know what I'm saying? So like, I don't know that I would listen to your sports podcast, but I would listen to this podcast because this feels like something that's uniquely you, and it helps to resonate your truth and the thing that you're trying to get out there to the world.
I was gonna say that's something that Irvin told me like a little bit ago. Well, I mean, I don't know, maybe almost a year ago. But he would ask me certain questions, and I'd be like, dude, like I feel bad answering those questions, just because certain people might not be there or whatever. And then he's like, well, that's your truth, and you can't you can't be ashamed of speaking your truth. And then after that, I was kind of like, well, all right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sometimes we need that reminder. And I even have to remind myself that quite a bit because, you go through these, you vacillate as a podcaster. And I think a good podcaster will struggle with this. You vacillate with, going in and trying to tweak everything and change everything because you're trying to meet this elusive goal that you want to be this certain type of person to everybody. I can't be all things to all people with a podcast. I just can't. But I can have a very hardcore audience that are my ride and dies, right? They're with me no matter what. And it's the people that I hear from all the time. And it's like, yo, I just heard your podcast. That was such a great episode. I'm always surprised. And I'm like, oh, okay. And they're like, and the one before that was even better. And then the one before that. And I'm like, oh, wow. So you're listening to all these, right? I'm like, and that's kind of what fuels me and reminds me that, again, my podcast is not going to be all things to all people. It's not going to, it may not move everybody, but it's going to move the right kind of people. And what I've always told people, especially when it comes to podcasting, because I work with companies that want to create a podcast. And of course, I'm like, listen, you're never going to be Joe Rogan. You're not going to sign a 9-figure deal with Spotify. It's just not going to happen. So don't come asking me, how am I going to get to 20,000 or 30,000 downloads? Because you may never get there. Yeah. But my thing is, if you have something to share, if your content is good, and you only reach 50 people an episode, then that's the content that those 50 people are supposed to hear. And whenever I tell somebody, because I do a lot of speaking, and I tell people all the time, people are like, oh, well, I'd love to have a room of 500 people to speak to. Well, if you create a podcast and you have 100 people listen to an episode, after 5 episodes, that's 500 people. But what if that same podcast has 500 people listening? Well, that's just like you being in a room with 500 people. Right. And it's just a whole idea that, OK, once people start thinking about it that way, they're like, oh, yeah, you know what? That is right. Yeah. Because then you're no longer like, well, I want thousands and thousands. You may not get it. I mean, when I tell people the real numbers, when you look at like actual podcast numbers, the top 1% of 1% of podcasts get 30,000 downloads an episode. That's the top 1% of 1%.
Yeah. That's so, like the
and of course, I mean, like Joe Rogan and my buddy Jordan Harbinger. I mean, he gets like 1 million or 1.5 million or like 2 million downloads an episode. My buddy Pat Flynn gets a couple 100,000 downloads an episode. Those are the outliers, right? And even the best of the best only get 30,000 an episode, just for perspective. Yeah. And so when I tell people, like, I try not to focus. I've never focused on the downloads. I've gotten a lot of downloads. I just don't focus on them because my thing is I'm focused on the message, and I want people to hear the message. And so that's kind of where we go. Because I get people all the time, and I'm like, even in a market like this where we have 570,000+ people, it's hard to be like, oh, well, I want to capture a certain part of that market, but it's just not easy. I mean, it just takes time, and you want to slowly get there. But hey, even if I have in the next few years, if I have 10,000 loyal listeners, I'm good with that, and that's not even 1% of the population. You know what I'm saying? And so
that's still so much. Like if you had those, then it'd be like, when you go out, people will come up to you and say, like, I listen to your podcast.
And it happens all the time. Yeah. And it really messes me up a lot of times because I always think, and I think every podcaster does, is that everybody's not listening. But then you realize that people are. And the thing
because
really
they don't share it on their social media, Randy. So I'm like, I guess you're not listening.
Right.
Someone comes up to us and says, like, oh, I like this episode. I'm like, why didn't you share it on your story?
And that's the crazy thing, because I don't do video first. I get a lot of people that hear my voice and they're like, "Hey, are you that guy with I Am Northwest Arkansas?" It happens all the time, and I've had it happen at the library. I've had it happen in the line at Walmart. I've had it happen in the line at Ozark Natural Foods. I've been up at Crystal Bridges, and somebody heard me talking. And it was like, "Are you doing that podcast?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's me." That's cool. So yeah, which is cool. But I mean, when if you have everybody, I think that does a podcast has a distinctive voice. Mm-hmm. Like if I heard Kyle out in the wild, right? Like out, be like, "Oh, that's Kyle Kellums from Ozarks at Large," and that's and it's not because I saw his face; it's because I heard it.
The voice.
Yeah. So and again, I think the other thing too is that the reason why voice is so strong is that a lot of people learn. People learn in different ways, right? So you have those that are visual learners, those that are audio that learn kinesthetically by touching and working with things, and then you have audio people that learn through audiology. And so I think it's important to understand that you're not going to be all things to all people, because some people just don't learn that way, right? Mm-hmm. And those are those people that are like, I never listen to podcasts because that's just not how I process information. Yeah. I process information through audio. That's my first love of process. I mean, some of it's visual, but all of it's primarily audio. And that's even my habits of how I listen. I always like asking other podcasters, how do you listen to podcasts? Because I listen to an inordinate amount. But a lot of it is just purely from a desire to gain additional knowledge and perspective.
Makes sense.
I like to be informed. I like to know what's going on. And to me, audio podcasts provide the most compact and portable way for you to consume information in multiple formats, meaning I can walk the dog, I can wash dishes. I can't watch YouTube while I'm washing. I mean, I could put, and I have done this. I've put the phone on the windowsill and I'm looking at a YouTube while I'm watching, but it doesn't always work.
I do that.
I can do a million things while listening to an audio podcast, and I do a million things while listening to an audio podcast.
So we definitely recommend people to go to this podcast festival. Coming up next month,
November 14th. They should. Even and especially if you are listening to this and you're like, man, I love what these guys do here at District 3, but I don't think I could do it. You need to come to this event because if nothing else, this event may give you the impetus to step out and say, you know what, if these guys can do it, if Randy can do it, I want to try a podcast. I have some ideas. And coming to an event like this, you're going to meet other like-minded people. You're going to hear problems that people have overcome and how they do what they do. And then if that doesn't provide you with the confidence and ideation that you need, I don't know what will, because you're going to be in the right space for you to get that information. And I think it's super valuable to be with other like-minded people.
And the day this episode comes out, which will be October 23rd, there's going to be a Monster Mashup event, which will be a creators collaboration event, and it's going to be at the Ravington in Centerton.
Okay.
So it's here in Northwest Arkansas.
Yeah.
Centerton's considered Northwest Arkansas, right?
It's the Monster
Man. I know, right? I was just listening to that the other night because I love listening to spooky songs, especially the Halloween soundtrack. So, but anyway, I digress. I think that would be good to do that, and I'm assuming that that's where their meeting's going to be for this month.
No, actually, on the 24th, October 24th, it's back to the Fayetteville Public Library.
Oh, okay.
So shout out to Charlie, who helped create those events here in Northwest Arkansas, and she actually has her own podcast, Saturday Night Sleepover. So check that out on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, and she actually helps run those events. And look, I've been to like 4 of them, and the time that I was there, people were just asking questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, either from like, hey, does this software work for you, to like, where do I start?
Right.
So for anybody that is thinking of just possibly doing either a podcast or creating YouTube content, go there. Like when I started podcasting, like also in 2019, like there wasn't anything like that. There was no meetups. You couldn't, like, I think Randy was the only person that I've heard of that was doing podcasting here in the area whenever I started. So like this tool, this resource is there for you, and it's free. You don't have to pay a membership to go to these events. So make sure you check out on October 23rd, the Monster Mashup at the Ravington Center 10 should be, I think, 6 p.m. And then the meetup, the 24th of October at the Fayetteville Public Library. I believe it's like 5:30, isn't it, Randy?
I think so.
I think it's around 5:30.
5:30 to 7 or something like that. But it's at least an hour and a half, and it's a chance for you to come together. There'll probably be some drinks there and some beverages and some snacks, and then some good conversation around podcasting. So like Irvin said, you will not be alone. And I think it's important to recognize that I have never met a more giving community than the podcasting community.
Yeah.
So most people, nobody's sitting around like, no, I'm not going to share my secrets with you because then you're going to compete. Because like nobody, you are a one of one, right? And I say that you are with District 3. I'm one of one with what I'm doing with I Am Northwest Arkansas. And yes, other people are out there doing podcasts about Northwest Arkansas, but nobody's going to match what I'm doing because I'm doing it. And that's the unique thing about it. And so I tell people all the time that, no one can take what was for you in the first place. So just, you got a good idea. You want to put it out there, just go do it, And I think this event would be kind of like the fuel that I think a brand new podcaster would need in order to be successful, and also in order to just get that encouragement that you need just to get things off the ground and get it going. Because like we said, pod fading is a real thing, and a lot of people make it 5 or 6 episodes, but then they never press record ever again.
Yeah,
and it's like something comes up and it's whatever. I never miss, and I have so much content already done. My joke is I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. I don't want to get hit by a bus tomorrow, but I'm just saying if I did, you wouldn't know that I had gotten hit by a bus until later because I have about 4 months worth of content at all times. So I'm good. But but my point is that it takes a while to get to that place. And one of the things that I tell people, especially when starting a podcast, is like when I started the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast, and I had done this once before, I came out of the gates with 10 episodes. I had episodes 1 through 10 done. So on April 1st of 2019, when I released the podcast, I released 10 episodes. Because invariably what happens is people want to hear more, right? And they're like, oh, you only did 1 episode? And now you're all like, your back's against the wall to get that second episode out and all that. Yeah. I had sat down with 10 people and had 10 already in the hopper.
Oh, wow.
And then I've just never looked back. So I've always had like a lot of extra content available. And I think that's really valuable. And that's another reason why I personally don't do a lot of time-based episodes, meaning this has to come out by a certain time, because people call me all the time and like, can you talk about such and such? I'm like, I can, but as I explained to them the context of how my podcast operates, the goal of the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast is to be as evergreen as possible. Meaning that, and there are a few that I'm starting to go back now and cultivate, and I'm slowly retiring a few episodes that don't need to be there for one reason or another, or just doesn't make any sense. Like if a restaurant closes, the great conversation, but the restaurant's not open anymore. So why should I get somebody excited about something that they can't even go see? So there is that, and but yeah, I mean, I also focus on. That's why I focus on the content of the conversations, because I want them to be something that people can take away and can utilize for a variety of reasons. Yeah.
And November 14th to 16th will be the festival day.
That should be fun. And I plan to be here for that.
At the Fayetteville Public Library. Shout out to the folks, shout out to Karen, to Ty, to Brittany, who have been doing a lot of good work, not only in the Little Rock area, but over here with our cast, and they've been putting in so many hours. So hopefully we can help them out a bit with this.
Is this the first time it's going to be in Northwest Arkansas? Typically it's
the
in
main
Little Rock?
one, yes.
Right, yeah.
There was last year, I think was it last year?
Well, last year they did it in both places. They did one day in Little Rock and one day up in Bentonville.
The meteor,
yeah, exactly,
right?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
But this is the first time where the main festival is here.
Yeah, right.
So please, people, capitalize
on
that.
Come on out.
Here in Northwest Arkansas.
Ty and Brittany are great, and they really have a heart to see everybody be successful with regard to podcasting. And that's why I say it's a great community. Be a part of that. You can come join all of us here and hang out and let your get your podcast off the ground.
Definitely. Where can people catch your podcast at, Randy?
I'm on every platform at I Am Northwest Arkansas, trademarked, of course. And but no, I'm on every platform. You can find me. I actually have a large following on LinkedIn because I do a lot of podcasts about business and entrepreneurship. I have a large following on Facebook and also on Instagram. And so, yeah, you can find me in those main places. And, I mean, anytime anybody wants to, you have a good idea about an episode or know somebody that maybe I should have on that's doing some great things here in Northwest Arkansas, let me know because I love to do that. And one of the things I certainly love to do is work with nonprofits in the area because nonprofits typically struggle with their brand and their brand image and just getting the word out, right? It's like my running joke with Tyler Clark. I'm like, dude, you and the Single Parent Scholarship Fund are the best kept secret of Northwest Arkansas. I mean, and that's just an example. And I'm only saying that to say that, yes, a lot of people know about them, but I still talk to people that are, and I'm using air quotes now, in the know. And then I'll mention like Single Parent Scholarship Fund, and they're like, what's that? And I'm like, really? You're kidding me, right? I'm like, no, these guys fundamentally changed generations of families through their program. And so I like working with nonprofits specifically. Restore Humanity, Returning Home. I've had just about every major nonprofit in Northwest Arkansas, or a lot of them, on the podcast because those stories matter, and those stories should be told early and often, and people should know those stories so that they could recite them to other people that need to know about it. So I still have a few nonprofits that I'm going to have on the podcast that I haven't had on the podcast. I'm looking forward to having Potter's House on the podcast really soon. They're doing some amazing work. As a matter of fact, that's a prime example. Like you see the Potter's House thrift store, which is in Fayetteville, but what you don't see are all the programs that they do behind that. And then you're like, holy crap, how is this not more known, right? It's like people need to know about this. They do. They are speaking.
I sat down with, was it Mark?
Well, there's Schwartzman.
Yeah. I sat down with Sean. Yeah. And he was telling me about all these different programs, and I was like, I had never heard of.
Yeah.
I've seen the store. I've been at the store.
And the crazy thing is, they're reaching a lot of people. Like he has a couple of the young men's groups, like high school men. And so I know a few of them because they're on the Fayetteville High School football team. And then he's got like one kid that's on the North Side team, another kid that's on Farmington, and then a couple of kids from Bentonville, and they all come together and they, I mean, there's just all kinds of really good things happening in our community that are right beneath our noses that we're just not aware of. And that's the value of a District 3 podcast. That's the value of an I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast and others that are sharing our platforms, especially with these nonprofits, to get the word out, right? To extend your brand. I mean, Jeff Bezos says that your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. Or what people say about you when you're not in the room. That's your brand, right? And so the idea is that sometimes people aren't saying anything because they just don't know. It's not a bad thing. It's just we got to create more awareness.
Definitely.
And that's why podcasts are important, and that's why podcasts like the District 3 podcast, the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast, that's not a boast. It's just, it's important for an exchange of ideas and, most importantly, information.
It's also important to subscribe and follow all of them
Yes,
on social media
absolutely.
And share your favorite podcast on your story.
Subscribe and follow to the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast. Also to us, give us some 5-star ratings too. That helps out in visibility. So if you're listening through our podcast, do that, but then also go to the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast. And also, the RCAST Awards are happening.
Yes.
So people can go vote.
Can come vote. Yes, they can vote on that.
Send
District
some
3
votes
is
both
up
our
for
ways.
several awards. I'm up for a few awards. So
anybody listening, go vote for both of us.
Yes,
right
absolutely.
Now.
Yes, right now.
As long as NWA takes the award.
First, though.
When is the last day for that?
I didn't know when is the November 1st. Okay, cool.
So November 1st is the deadline.
Listen, I got people all over the country voting for me.
There we go.
So I have a lot of folks out there voting. So
www.arkansaspodcasters.org/vote. Go give us a vote, please, if you're listening to this. But for everybody listening, that was the end of this episode. Randy, thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
This was a pleasure. We had done a couple others, but I'm glad we sat down and really chopped it up and just had this conversation. So we definitely have to do it again.
There's a lot of golden nuggets there of information on this podcast, so thank you for dropping those.
Sure.
But for everybody listening, that was the end of the episode. This is Edwin.
This is Elena.
And Miggs.
And we're signing off.